Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2You Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2you.net/sociology. And once you're on there, you can pick up revision guides, revision videos, flashcards, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so on to this episode, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Richard Driscoll. Richard, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks very much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And you are coming in from China. So how many hours ahead are you there?
We're 8 hours ahead at the moment.
8 hours ahead. Excellent. Well,
yeah, I'm enjoying the nice light show out my window at the moment for Chinese New Year celebrations.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I know weather where you are compared to me is very different at the moment. I've got a dusting of snow here in the UK at the time of recording.
Yeah, it's 23 degrees and blue skies in Shenzhen, so I won't gloat too much, but it's been quite nice today.
Lovely. Richard, do you want to start by telling us a little bit more about who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. I've been teaching sociology for 13 years now. My degree was social policy, which for some of you who might not know has a sort of combination of sociology, economics and politics, with a focus there on social inequalities. And I came into teaching mid-career. Before that, I was working with Housing Association in accounts and lived in New Zealand. So I came back and it was sort of not maybe an unusual route. And I think what's interesting, listening to your podcast, is that a lot of the sociologists, they didn't start off with sociology. So I'm no different there. So I taught in the UK for 7 years in a state school in Epsom. Before moving to China, I kind of wanted to have a different context for my teaching to see how the UK studies fit in and explore a different society. And I think I was amazed when I moved here, just the passion for sociology. I had 72 students wanting to get into one class in my very first day here. And I've really enjoyed teaching in Shenzhen, and it's really expanded as a course. We now have 80 students at AS level, and we have a lot of alumni who've graduated now from universities such as ASC, so it's been really exciting place to work.
Sorry, how long did you say you've been in China now?
I've been here 7 years now. Time flies. So my original plan was just to stay for a few years, and I just found that I really enjoyed it, and there's also been experiences with other sociologists. I managed to sort of team up with local sociologists. In fact, one was on your podcast earlier on. So that's been really quite exciting as well, to sort of work with real sociologists and do projects with students.
One thing I'm interested in, Richard, because I've taught international students as well. In fact, I've taught a lot of students from China. Does the curriculum still feel very kind of Western-centric to you? Do they kind of click and understand and connect with it?
Yeah, it does. I'm teaching Cambridge International, so it's slightly different to the UK exam boards in that you can use examples and they will be rewarded. But the textbooks that we use in Haralambous are sort of very much UK centred. So it is quite a challenge to sort of develop resources to sort of bring the subject to life for the students you're teaching. And especially that was difficult at first. I think you're absolutely right. And otherwise, sociology is not really an exciting subject if you're just talking about UK studies to Chinese students.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. So the main thing that we were going to talk about today is a webinar that you've recently been involved in. So do you want to tell us all about that, please?
Yeah, a bit of context here. So sociology has been increasing in terms of the number of international schools which are offering it. When I first taught here, I think there was only 6 or 7. So the course that we use is through Cambridge Assessment of International Education. And they contacted me and asked, could I do a webinar for the growing number of Chinese teachers here? And I thought what would be interesting was, rather than to sort of just go through the specification and sort of exam papers, was to apply examples of COVID and how it relates to the curriculum. And it was a really interesting experience, and it was nice for the Chinese teachers as well to offer their perspectives on how COVID relates to sociology. So to give like an example, we can look at conformity, which is obviously on the AS topic. So it's interesting to see why people conform to wearing masks, and maybe the differences to conformity in China compared with, say, the UK. And then if you look at the issue of wearing masks, when I came over to the UK this time last year, and in the news there was a lot of in the media they were saying, oh, the masks were ineffective, and Boris Johnson was not really supporting the wearing of masks and showing off about how he'd been handshaking with everyone, etc. And then you go around 6 months later and the UK's position's completely changed, and you've got issues. So the issue of conformity is one which really applies quite well to COVID. So that was like one of the starting points. And I think when you do this, then when you're teaching a topic like that, then the students are really engaged with the discussions.
That sounds really interesting, Richard. Could tell us a little bit more. What other areas other than conformity did you look at?
Also, the education unit which I teach, there's a big emphasis on inequalities. And a lot of the inequalities, as you sort of mentioned earlier, they're to do with studies to do with the UK. So you've got sort of the classics, like you've got Paul Willis, Learning to Labour, etc. And so what I thought would be interesting is for the students to recreate a select committee task. So what we did was we explored some of the inequalities to do with COVID. So, for example, the digital divide. So I think it's really good for the students. So they were using some of the key studies in Haralambous, but alongside that, they could look at the reports, for example, by the Sutton Trust on the digital divide. And there's been research on digital divide and its impacts in Hong Kong as well. Where I'm in Shenzhen, Hong Kong is just over the border. So the students were produced a report, select committee style, and then we asked questions as a class to sort of analyse some of the findings. So this is something that's got a very interesting task. And what was great was actually when we did this mock select committee, we looked at the actual select committee, and they were having exactly the same debate that day. So that was just coincidence. But so that's another example where we can look at education and inequalities and how that relates to COVID.
How is the kind of divide between the essentially kind of state and private education? Obviously, we're talking about 7% in the UK go to private schools, around that amount. What's it like in China?
Yeah, it's interesting in China because where I am in Shenzhen, there is a lot of affluence. We've got a lot of the key sort of companies like Huawei, which pay very high wages. So you do have some private schools for sure, and there's a growth in international schools. But also you have the sort of the different state schools which have different standards, and a lot of the issues that you might explore in the UK. So that the house prices will be really expensive near the schools with the best Gaokao results in China, just similar to the UK. So I'm not sure. It's hard to get data sometimes on the number of private schools. Because that's one thing you'll find when you're teaching sociology in China, that there's some topics that we haven't got the equivalent of ONS, for example.
Yes.
So not easy always to get the data on some topic areas.
Thank you. And so you looked at conformity, you looked at education inequality. Any other areas you explored?
Yeah. Also, the media is obviously a fascinating topic for this, and agenda setting. So it's very interesting when you can look at the sort of the agenda setting of the relationship between China and America, when you've got Donald Trump putting quite offensive tweets out there early on in the pandemic, and the kind of reaction that had in China. you can imagine. And so I think like you've got the media's have got very interesting ideas there, and then you've got the UK media and how they have presented COVID. And I think it's quite interesting. I show covers of Private Eye. I mean, that's one of the things I miss living out in China. I'm a big fan of Private Eye, and I think it's quite interesting just showing Private Eye and the covers and how they sort of make fun of Boris Johnson and how he sort of handled COVID. And I think it's interesting. So when you're teaching about the media, and you've got the dominant media, but you have got, I mean, pluralism has got some relevance. You have got other medias in the UK which can sort of hold the government to some kind of account.
Because the perception from this end, and maybe it's wrong, Richard, is that the Chinese media is heavily restricted, heavily regulated, and so we're not often seeing or hearing the truth. To what degree is there some truth to that, some validity to that? Yes, I mean, there is quite considerable censorship here for the media. For example, a lot of the social media sites are unavailable. I think what's interesting is that some of the UK media and how they have portrayed China as well. Because I have people asking my mum, they're asking her about the situation in China in terms of like lockdown. I mean, here we've been very free since March. There's not been very many restrictions at all. Mm-hmm. And so people ask my mum, she says, "Oh no, you can't believe Chinese media. They're faking it, and no, there's full lockdown here." And she's like, "Well, I have just been talking by Skype to my son yesterday, and I've kind of seen the pictures, and I don't think he's sort of lying to me here." So I think it's quite interesting, the sort of perceptions of media from different countries and how they sort of view China, for example, or how China views other countries as well. Yeah. The thing that really interests me is, as I said, I was teaching in an international school this time last year when the pandemic kicked off, and I was teaching quite a lot of Chinese students as well, and they showed me some Chinese media. Obviously, they translated it for me. And one of the things said that if you're in the UK and you're not white and British, then you won't be treated for COVID, which caused a lot of panic and actually caused a lot of the students to fly home earlier than they were anticipating. I was really quite shocked and amazed by that. Yeah, you're right. I think there was a lot of focus here about the Australia media, because there'd been universities, there'd been a couple of Chinese students who'd had quite negative experiences, and there's certainly a lot of focus of that here. So I think there was concern about Chinese students maybe suffering racism in the US or Australia. So that was something that did reach Chinese media. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. That is going to be the end of part one. In part two, we'll continue the discussion.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for the Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Hello and welcome back to part two of the Sociology Show. I'm talking to Richard Driscoll, coming in from China. Richard, I wanted to ask you about the kind of status of sociology as a subject. You said it was pretty popular. How does it stand in terms of status as a subject?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I was really interested the work that Mike Savage did on the status of sociology in the UK, and also having taught in the UK for 7 years. So often I found that you didn't get the very top academic students in the UK might have been guided towards, say, taking history, for example. And that was a sort of battle you sometimes had as a sociology teacher, that the careers advisor saw it as a sort of a soft subject. And you kind of wanted to walk over there with an exam paper and say, well, you know, how would you answer this question on the Marxist explanations of crime and deviance? It's not an easy question. So that was something I found frustrating in the UK. What was interesting in coming to China is it's quite the opposite. That in the school that I'm teaching at, that sociology has got a really high status, and that the students, they go way beyond the curriculum. So they'll find a topic area that they're interested in, and they will carry out research projects. We've got quite a few of them were published on Chris Lively, the textbook writer's blog. And the students see it as one, it's very, they know obviously it's a demanding subject, but they really see it as high status because they feel that they're going to develop their critical thinking skills. And also that it's a really good preparation for university because of the reading required and thinking in a different way. So what I found with that is that you have some of the really high academic students, some of the most able, really wanting to study sociology and get really excited by that, which is really great place. I mean, it makes it, one of the reasons I've been here 7 years, it's a really great place to teach where students are so excited by the subject. And when I told them that it had lower status in the UK, the students were very confused and they didn't really understand why that would be the case, I guess.
Do you mean like a higher status within humanities or within all subjects?
Oh, okay. So it's within humanities. It certainly wouldn't be seen as having lower status than history or geography, not like it might do in the UK. So it certainly wouldn't be there. And it's seen as having a high status if you want to then study humanities at university. So what you'll find is that the students who are interested in studying engineering, for example, will still go down the traditional routes of studying physics and maths. But if the students want to do humanities, sociology is seen as a really good course for that. And the other thing that's changed is the status amongst parents. So again, when I first moved to the school, a lot of parents were a bit uneasy if their son or daughter decided they want to do sociology because it's something they were unfamiliar with. And they didn't know what employment opportunity it might lead to. But as the alumni have graduated and the students that I've taught have gone on to LSE and they've then done masters, for example, in international education at Oxford, they've then gone on to really good jobs. So then that sort of had a knock-on effect through WeChat and through parents that sociology is a subject which leads to good careers. So that's had a big impact as well. So I have far fewer students coming up to me saying, "Sir, I really love sociology, but my parents want me to study finance. What course can I do?" And there's not really many joint honours of finance and sociology. And what's great now is students say, "I really want to study sociology," and they don't have to necessarily convince their parents.
That's interesting. And as you know, I've taught in a couple of other countries. I've taught in Kenya and Spain. I think there still is a higher status for the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, particularly if you do that alongside economics and double maths or something like that. But that's really interesting that it's got a higher status. Well, why do you think that is, Richard? Why do you think it's gained that high status?
I think it's partly, I think the subject, I mean, obviously I've got a bias, but sociology, I think it's a fantastic subject. And it does really help with critical thinking. The sort of the questions, the fact is with sociology, unlike some other subjects, there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's how you use the sociological evidence to formulate your argument. So I think that what surprises me is that it hasn't got a higher status in other countries, such as the UK. So I think like in China, it's got a higher status and it's the sort of the right place it should be. But what I would say is that if sociology is not on offer at state schools in China, and in state schools in China, then it is still the natural sciences which have the higher status. It is the maths and the physics. So the humanities offer in a state school in China wouldn't have such high status.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there any plans to? Obviously, there's a big movement to try and get sociology on the national curriculum in the UK. Is there such a thing in China?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I can't see that happening anytime soon. But I just think it's going to expand more in the international sector for students applying to UK and US. But I don't think it will necessarily happen on the national curriculum.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I never asked you, Richard, your own inspirations. Who are your own inspirations, or who do you enjoy reading about within sociology?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It's a great question. So when I went to study at York, I went to the induction day and I went to guest lectures because I was thinking of doing a joint honours of social policy and sociology. I was really interested in the course because of sort of my background. I grew up in a vicarage in inner city London and was really interested in sort of inequalities and poverty, etc. So what I was really inspired, the social policy route sort of took hold. And in that, I was really interested in people such as Peter Townsend, his Poverty in the UK study. I think like I will identify sociologists as if they're found in Haralambos. That would be my parameter. And Pete Townsend is. So I got interested in and I had that book at home in the vicarage. It was on the shelf, and it's a massive book, Poverty in the UK. But I thought that was interesting, looking at sort of social surveys and like what percentage of people could afford, for example, for their children to have friends round for a birthday. And it really sort of exposed that poverty was a much bigger problem than people realised. So that was like a sort of an early inspiration of, and then after that, again, they might not be strictly sociologists, but Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, who are also in Haralambos, The Spirit Level is just a brilliant book. I read it in a day on a beach in Bali. It's one of those books I read in one sitting, and then on the back of that, I actually joined the pressure group, the Equality Trust, and marched to London in protest. And that's when I really try and get students to read, because it just makes you think in different ways. And the Inner Level more recently is fantastic as well. So I guess I started off more on the social policy type route. But once I've started teaching sociology, I really like reading ethnography. And Paul Willis is just is great to read, Learning to Labour. And it's a really fun one because you can get students acting out the parts, and it's just a really interesting book. So yeah, I think I've moved into reading more ethnography. But what's been great about your shows is that a lot of the sociologists I've taught in the classroom, it's great to find out the context behind how they got into sociology and their passions. So again, like Mike Savage is a fantastic sociologist, and he's so friendly. When he did his inaugural lecture at LSE on the Great British Class Survey, I took my students along, and then afterwards they were like a bit in awe because it was Mike Savage, and he was just so friendly, like talking to them afterwards. And I think that's what comes across on your show is the passion of the sociologists and how they're so accessible, and they really appreciate when students like their work.
Yeah, I think it's really important for students to hear what's saying rather than just reading black and white text in a book as well, to be honest.
Oh, it's so much better, because I think you just don't, when you see, like, for example, in Haralambos, and they've got the study, you just don't really get a feel. And often the methodology is missing. So you just got, right, here's some findings, here's some evaluation points, here's some criticisms. And it doesn't do much more than that. But when you see the actual, what's behind it and the person and how they found the research, yeah, it's great. And that's what makes students want to take sociology at university.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, there's a few that have missed. Okay, I'll include one more, and one more who's also I've listed on your show. Tarek Madood's also very interesting as well. I think Tarek Madood's interesting because it just made, when the old course for OCR, I really enjoyed the one that had the different types of identities.
Yeah.
And Tarek Madood's really interesting because it just makes you think about ethnic identity in a different way and how it's not fixed, and his work on multiculturalism. And so, yeah, he's a really interesting sociologist as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really popular episode, that actually. That's a two-parter. If you haven't listened, people, go back and have a listen to that one. And Richard, going back to the webinar that you mentioned, can people go back and they can watch it? They can see the recording?
Yeah, what I'll do is I have a sociology Twitter feed, which is R Driscoll Soc. I've had that for about 7 years, or no, longer than that actually, a long time. So on that, I can post a link. So if anyone is interested, then they can watch the webinar. I mean, the webinar is kind of pitched at sociology teachers, but that doesn't mean students still find parts of it relevant as well, I'm sure.
Great, thank you very much. And what's the future plans then, Richard? You going to stay in China indefinitely, or are you going to come back one day?
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm not sure currently. My current plans the next 3 weeks is to enjoy Chinese New Year and do lots of hiking and etc. I must admit, I am missing London, and it's the problem. I mean, with lockdown, it is difficult not being able to sort of see friends and family. So yeah, who knows what the future holds, but currently absolutely love teaching sociology here. It's been really quite exciting.
Excellent. And enjoy that weather today, Richard.
I will do as well. I'm enjoying that a lot more than I'm enjoying Arsenal football team at the moment, sadly.
Fair enough. Thank you, Richard. I really, really enjoyed talking to you. Best wishes.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for the Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.